Hello, good morning. Well, good morning from my time zone. Thank you all for joining us. Hi, I'm Sarah McMullen, Chief Marketing Officer at Janek Performance Group, and I will be acting today as the moderator for our panelists for this panel discussion, reviewing game tape, optimizing sales strategy through win-loss analysis. This is a special joint webinar with Clozd and Janek Performance Group. Clozd powers win-loss analysis with innovative software. The Clozd platform automates the win-loss process and provides ongoing organization-wide visibility into why you really win and lose. Janek Performance Group is an industry-leading, research-based, award-winning sales performance company offering solutions such as sales training, sales consulting, talent management to companies from startups to Fortune 100. If you can't tell, I've got notes over here. I've got questions lined up over here and a timer over here, so I'm going to do my best to keep everyone on the same page and also be able to answer and raise your questions to the panelists. This is an interactive conversation. So we did get a number of questions submitted beforehand. Thank you to those of you who submitted those questions. And also, as this conversation is going on, if you have your own questions and comments that you would like to make, you'll see that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. That's going to be the best way to get your questions in front of me, the panelists, and also the members of Clozd and Janek who are working frantically behind the scenes to make sure everybody can see and hear what we are saying throughout this event. Additionally, you will be receiving a recording of this webinar within about the next 24 hours. We encourage you to share the webinar, share the recording with whoever you think might find some value out of it. Watch it again. I think you're going to get a lot of good insights that are going to be worth sharing. So please share it as you get it. Finally, toward the end of this event, there are going to be a couple of free offers from both Clozd and Janek. So please stick around to the end of the event so you can learn what those are and take advantage of them. So with that, I'm going to invite our panelists to turn on their mics, turn on their cameras, and join us so I can offer some introductions. Our first panelist today is Andrew Peterson, co-CEO and co-founder of Clozd. Prior to founding Clozd, Andrew spent 8 years at Qualtrics, a research technology company that was acquired by Silver Lake for $12.5 billion. That's billion with a B, earlier this year. During his tenure at Qualtrics, Andrew worked in sales and sales leadership and went on to found and launch Qualtrics, the Qualtrics XM directory product. Excuse me, Qualtrics is a tough one to say over and over again. Qualtrics.
You got it. Good job, Sarah.
He was involved in the Qualtrics win-loss analysis program before leaving to found Clozd in 2017. Also joining us is Nick Kane, managing partner at Janek Performance Group. Nick serves as a managing partner here at Janek. He's also my boss. He leads the strategic vision for sales and marketing within the company. Previously, Nick served as the national sales director for the largest private telecommunications organization in North America. He has 25 years of experience. He's personally trained and directed the training of thousands and thousands of sellers and sales leaders, and also consulted with some sales organizational level leaders at some major, as I mentioned, major Fortune 100 companies. Nick also co-authored the book, Critical Selling: How Top Performers Accelerate the Sales Process and Close More Deals, which I have right here sitting behind me if you didn't see it. Highly recommend checking that out. Welcome, Nick, Andrew. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Sarah.
So this panel, this webinar, whichever you want to call it, is called Reviewing Game Tape, Optimizing Sales Strategy Through Win-Loss Analysis. So let's start by diving into this analogy. Andrew, what does it mean to study film or review game tape?
Well, I imagine, Sarah, probably on this call, we have quite a few athletes. There tend to be a lot of athletes or sports fans in sales. Salespeople are, obviously very competitive by nature a lot of the times. So I'm a big sports fan. I think Nick is too. And those who are into sports recognize that every professional athlete, every professional sports team that is intent on reaching their full potential or winning championships does film study. They go back after a win or a loss and they review the game film to see, how did it really go? The perceptions of how it went that you have from the experience itself oftentimes are different than what you actually see in the game tape when you go back and watch what really happened. And it's a vital strategy that the best athletes in the world put in practice to make sure they can reach optimal performance.
So Nick, as a Lakers fan, how does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Diehard Laker fan, diehard Kobe fan, I would add to that as well. And for anybody that has studied, Kobe at all in his life, he was huge on game film, and he was huge on going back and just continuing to build that muscle memory that I think draws a huge parallel between sports and sales. We hear that all the time, and it could be cliche in some, to some people, but ultimately there are so many parallels you can draw, not just from a game film perspective, but also just this idea of fundamentals and being, sticking to the core of what makes an athlete a top performer and a champion. I think rings true with sales as well. And Kobe was the epitome of going back, developing his skills. There's stories I hope I get a chance to tell on interviews that he shared today that talked about how he wasn't, the greatest athlete growing up. He really had to build that muscle memory and those core skills. And a lot of that was going back, revisiting, watching, and continuing to build his skills over time.
Andrew, can you give me an example of some bad film study?
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of examples, but just on Kobe for a bit, I think those who have followed Kobe, paid attention to his career at all, recognize that his defining trait as a champion was his mentality. He was just obsessive about being great. And that mentality, that commitment, that obsession with going back and reviewing his past performance to improve future performance was really what set him up for the success and the career that he had. And surprisingly, not everyone buys into that mentality. There are examples in sports of people that don't, and it impacts their performance. I think there was an interesting story recently that some of you may have picked up on about Kyler Murray, the quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals. They announced a year or two ago his new contract, huge contract, hundreds of millions of dollars. And there was a unique clause embedded in there that caught people off guard, that the team was requiring him as part of that contract to do a certain number of hours of film study every week. And that's not something that you should have to contractually obligate your franchise quarterback to do. That should just be part of their mentality already, or you think that it was. And I pulled a quote from an interview with Kyler Murray where he just said, this reflects his attitude. He said, "I think I was blessed with the cognitive skills to just go out there and just see it before it happens. I'm not one of those guys that's going to sit there and kill myself watching film." And so it'll be interesting to see how his career plays out, but I have a hard time thinking that he's going to reach his fullest potential or have the kind of career that he could have and win the championships that he could win if he's not willing to go back and review past performance to improve the way Kobe did.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think that's a great example of how even top performers in sales, or those that rely too much on their their natural capabilities, let's say, and don't continue to build their skills and that sort of muscle memory, is where you see performers fall short. And what separates a top performer from an average performer. Kobe tells that story as well. Similar thought, but growing up when he was young, again, he wasn't the best player. He went and played in some camp in Philadelphia. He was like 10 or 11 years old, and he played the whole summer. And this was a camp, a world-class camp in Philly. His father played there, who was also an NBA player. His uncle played there. Wilt Chamberlain played there. Earl the Pearl Monroe played there. I mean, some great names. And he played the entire summer and didn't score 1 point the entire summer. And the interviewer that was interviewing him, this was a Lewis House interview recent, just before he passed. And he talks about how, Lewis was like, were you on the court? Did you actually play? I mean, you played the whole summer, didn't score one point. And he was like, yeah, I played, but I just sucked. I wasn't a great player. I had to develop my skills. And then they talked about a plan that he put in place with his father to continue to build those skills and reflect on what he wasn't doing well. And all of it was reflection, going back, looking at his game, and then just chunking that down into smaller sections and continuing to work on that for periods of time until he got better and better. And by the time he was 14, he was now like the best player in the Philadelphia area. And then his athleticism started to kick in, and then his height grew, and like all these other natural factors that influenced it. But how many times do you see athletes or even salespeople rely so much on their quote unquote athleticism and not on, going back, reviewing and building, those skills to be effective?
Love that. That interview by Lewis Howes is something that everybody on this call should go check out. It gives you a glimpse into Kobe's mentality. So it's a phenomenal interview. There's another story in there that I love where later in his career, Kobe mentored a lot of people, including young female athletes. And there was one particular gal that was on the UConn basketball team. And if anyone knows UConn, they have been a complete dynasty in women's college basketball. And they ended up one year, I think, being undefeated, but they played in the national championship game against Notre Dame and they lost. And the following year, Kobe was speaking with one of the stars from that team, and he was mentoring her. And he asked her if she had gone back and watched the film from that national championship loss. And she said, no, I don't want to go back and relive that pain. I haven't watched it. I don't need to go do that. And Kobe's reaction is how could you not? That is a huge opportunity. And don't you think you might encounter this Notre Dame team again this season? So you've got to go back and watch what happened, review past performance so that you can set yourself up for success in the future.
Yeah.
So now that we've got a good understanding of the analogy, I feel like a lot of sellers and sales leaders, they understand the idea of reviewing game tape, or the analogy of reviewing game tape, understanding their performance, why they won, why they lost. How have you, this question is for both of you, how have you seen teams approach reviewing their game tape?
Yeah, I can start there if that's all right, Andrew. So a couple things I think I would mention, and I'll let you add, but there's a variety of ways you can go back and sort of, let's call it, review game tape in a sales environment. I mean, I think certainly there's postmortems and debrief following sales interactions, I think is very common. We live in an environment now from a sales perspective where we have the luxury of doing a lot of our sales calls like this, where you can record those calls, you can go back and debrief on those calls. And those that are in a sales leadership role that are responsible for coaching have the opportunity to be able to use that technology to their advantage. Conversational intelligence is big in the marketplace now. So tools like Gong and some others where you can, again, record the calls, but also see trends in those calls and go back and review some of those certain keywords, certain information that should be presented at certain times on sales calls, help review and be able to improve skills as well. Think of role playing and things like that on some real specific scenarios within an organization. So there's a variety of ways that I think sales leaders can review game tape. Those are some that come to mind for me. Andrew, any that come to mind for you?
Oh yeah, I'm just reflecting back on my days as an account executive and in sales leadership, all the things that we would try to improve our performance, or you probably did this too, Nick. We'd have situations where a leader or a colleague would come sit in the room while the sales call is happening, but kind of hide off video and just listen in, maybe provide some coaching from the corner, maybe write on a whiteboard, coaching the young rep, just live in the moment. To these postmortems, like you mentioned, like getting people in a room after the deal is won or lost, or after the sales call is finished, and talking about what happened and getting everyone's perspectives. And then I think about, more broadly, leadership at a company, how they try and get a grasp or a picture of what's happening across deals. There's these strategies like we're talking about for going back and reviewing a single deal or providing coaching to a single sales rep. But how do you zoom out if you're the coach and get a picture of what's happening more broadly across the entire team? And that's where, in the last 10 plus years, with the emergence of tools like Gong and other conversation intelligence tools, that has changed the sales landscape, that you can go back and have a library of all your recorded calls and go and review those and run analytics on those calls and start to paint a bigger picture. And sales operations teams too, they try and kind of dive into the CRM and see what data is in there that could help cobble together a picture for the leadership team about what's happening across deals. What are the themes and trends? But one thing that we're starting to see, and that Clozd is privileged to be a part of, is the emergence of disciplined win-loss analysis as a practice for more and more sales teams, where sales teams are realizing that, maybe we're not capturing everything by recording the sales calls. And maybe we don't actually internally in our business have all the answers about why the deal was won or lost. Ultimately, the only person that has those answers might be the prospect themselves. And so how can we tap into the prospects and solicit their feedback to get a better understanding of why deals are won and lost? And that is the definition of win-loss analysis. It's the disciplined, ongoing practice of soliciting feedback from the actual prospects, the buyers themselves, to understand why they did or didn't purchase and aggregate that data over time so you have a clear and compelling view into why deals are won and lost that a leadership team can take action on.
So, Andrew, we hear a lot, sellers believe they understand or they have answers for why they won or lost deals. Are those accurate? Do they really know why they won or lost a deal?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's really the fundamental question when it comes to practicing win-loss analysis. So I'm glad you brought that up. I go back to an experience I had just to illustrate. I was, a sales leader at a company in Utah called Qualtrics that was mentioned earlier. And we were growing really fast, having a ton of success. We were entering some new markets with some new use cases for our technology. And we were pretty confident. We thought we had the best technology for this particular use case, but we hadn't won a lot of deals in that particular area before. And we had an RFP with Hyatt Hotels Group. And it was going to be the biggest deal in company history. It was about 50 times the average deal size at the time. So this was a big, big deal for Qualtrics. And we lost. And we thought we should win. And so we did what we talked about earlier. We had a postmortem. Our CEO pulled everybody that was involved in the deal into a room. And we kind of went around the table one by one, kind of giving an explanation to the CEO of why we lost this deal. And everybody's explanation as we were around the table was different. And finally, somebody, I don't remember who, somebody in the room said, apparently we don't know. So why don't we reach out and ask Hyatt? And we did. And fortunately, Hyatt was very gracious and willing to give us feedback. And they shared, that we weren't even a finalist that they considered. So we didn't even make it to the final stage of the RFP. They never seriously considered us. And we found out that our price point was dramatically too low. When they looked at the price we were quoting compared to the other vendors they were considering, it was so much lower that they thought it's going to be impossible for Qualtrics to deliver what we're looking for at that price point if all these other vendors are charging so much more. So they must not truly understand our requirements, and we don't even need to read this RFP response further. So that wasn't an answer that anyone at the table gave. That was insight we didn't have, knowledge we didn't have internally, and we didn't get it until we solicited feedback directly from the prospect and heard it from them. So the fact is, and Clozd has data to show this now, because as part of our platform, we connect to our clients' CRM systems. We see the data about all the deals that they're winning and losing, including sales reported loss reasons that the sales reps have logged in the CRM. And we've been able to systematically compare those to what the buyers then provide when they're giving feedback. And when we ran that data, we had expectations that sales reps would be incorrect a lot of the time, but we were shocked by the data because 85% of the time, the sales reps were completely wrong about why the deal was won or lost. The reason they tagged in the CRM didn't match any of the 4 or 5 reasons that the buyer gave for their decision. So sales reps just, in some cases, don't know. They're not privy to the information, like in the Hyatt example. Or, there's a lot that's asked of them in terms of CRM reporting already, and they might be, in a hurry and lazy about the data that they enter. There's a lot of reasons why the data could be wrong, but the fact is that it's wrong most of the time. And that presents a serious challenge for leaders that want to get to the bottom of what they can do as a business to improve win rates.
Yeah. That's a great story. That's so compelling, just to think, to be in that room in that pressure-filled situation with the CEO of the organization, and to not have data that is consistent speaks to the value of truly doing win-loss. And I would say we see similar stories with our clients as well. I mean, most of the time when we work with our clients and we're interviewing sales reps, or we're looking at some of their larger data around why deals lose, you go to the CRM, you pull that data of all the opportunities, whatever was in the pipeline, what came out of the pipeline on the loss side, and you have very consistent answers. And in many cases, it trends towards cost, right? Because that's typically the default that sellers fall to, versus some other things that it could be. And normally we see, and even if you make the fields in CRM, non-conditional, like you have to put them in, they select the first option in the tick list. It's just another thing they have to do in that set of administrative tasks, like you said, Andrew. And that data doesn't become very accurate. So that's certainly what we see, is just they don't really know. And then I would add to that point also, in our experience, and we've supported clients in doing win-loss as well, certainly on the interview side more so than the great technology that you guys offer. But just doing some interviews and really trying to get to the bottom of that. We've done it internally as well as a consistent practice, just to understand how our sellers perform. And the one thing that we see consistently is buyers don't want to give a lot of information at times to their seller directly. Sometimes they're willing to, but sometimes even if you ask, sometimes a client like Hyatt's gracious enough to share really real feedback. But a lot of times it's very general, it's very surface level. And if it is the seller that they, ultimately was the issue, they don't want to share that information with them directly, because they don't want to insult them, they don't want to hurt their feelings, and they certainly don't want to damage the relationship should they, have a chance to work together in the future. So there's definitely some gaps there, bad CRM data commonly, and just not able to gather really good information.
So Andrew, how would you respond to that buyers are the kind of that single source of truth, not necessarily the reps? Are buyers willing to open up and share candid feedback? Like, what has your experience been?
Yeah, it's a great point. It really depends on the method and approach you take to soliciting their feedback. Yeah. And so, yeah, especially if it's mid-sales cycle, they're going to be very reluctant. They're playing poker the whole time they're in the sales process. So, definitely reaching back out to them post-decision to get their feedback is, priority number one. Make sure that, the stakes aren't high because they've already made their decision. Second is, who is asking for the feedback? If it is the sales rep that's asking for the feedback, the nature of their response is going to be different than if they're responding to someone they perceive as being neutral or objective or uninvolved in the sales process. That's just the psychology of it. And so that might be someone else at the company, someone from another function, or it might be an entirely neutral third party that you're working with to do that outreach on your behalf. And what we found is not every buyer is going to devote the time, effort, energy to respond and provide feedback, but a surprising number do, especially if you're reaching out post-decision with the help of a neutral third party. You'll often get 1 in 5, 1 in 4, maybe, of your buyers to give you feedback. And that's if you're inviting them to participate in an interview, which is a fairly big commitment. They're going to spend 20 to 30 minutes talking through the decision-making process. And these are all busy professionals that have a lot of things going on. And so the fact that, 20 to 30% of them would be willing to participate in that sort of interaction is actually quite a lot. If you compare that to, my background, having been at Qualtrics for nearly a decade, Qualtrics is a survey data collection technology company. And if you survey your buyers and expect them to fill out a survey as the mechanism for providing feedback, you're going to see much lower participation rates, even though it's quick, even though it's fast. They could just spend a few minutes. The fact that it's so impersonal and it's so easy to just say no, and you're not telling a person no, you're just archiving a link that was sent to you. You can usually expect maybe 5% or less of your buyers to respond to a survey. So it really comes down to the mechanism that you're using. Interviews are much more successful in terms of getting them to participate and getting them to share a robust, detailed explanation of why they made their decision.
So if those buyers do open up, they sometimes have critical feedback. They might have critical feedback of the seller that they worked with. Is that common? And how open are sellers and sales teams? How open are they to actually receiving this feedback?
Yeah, good question. So the buyers are open. Once they start participating, especially if they're talking to a neutral third party, they can't help themselves but to start sharing both the good and the bad. And there's a lot of critical feedback that buyers share in the context of these types of win-loss interviews. It could be critical feedback about the sales experience, potentially. It's also very often critical feedback about the pricing model, the way a quote was built. It could be about the product itself. It could be the experiences that they had with the content and the learning resources the company provided during the sales process. There's all kinds of things that they might have critical feedback about, all of which is very constructive for a company that's trying to win more deals like that in the future. Buyers also share the things that went well. They're very open in sharing the positive feedback, the positive sentiment that they came away with. There are a lot of things to be learned. Some sales teams, to your point, Sarah, are a little bit nervous to start getting this kind of feedback because it might skew constructive or critical about the sales team. And, going back to our sports analogies, I think about, another Southern California sports teams, the USC Trojans. They were a football dynasty in the early 2000s, and Pete Carroll, their coach, he instituted something called Tell the Truth Monday, where every Monday after they'd had a game, they came in and they just had a culture where they knew that they were just going to embrace hard truths. They were going to watch film and they were going to call out the mistakes and the errors that were made during the game. And it wasn't a witch hunt to get any one person in trouble. It was just the culture that they built because they knew that that was the opportunity to improve and get better. So I think sales teams that embrace that kind of a culture and say, win-loss analysis isn't about hunting down the one experience that a customer had where it reflects poorly on a sales rep and we're going to get that rep in trouble. That's not the point. The point is to figure out trends and themes across deals that the company can address that will make it easier for sales reps to win in the future. So that's the ultimate goal of win-loss analysis, is to make selling easier for each rep and to improve win rates.
Yeah, I'll add. I couldn't agree more, Andrew. I'll add to that point. I think organizations, when we look at a high-performing sales organization, one of the things we see pretty consistently is they've established a culture of coaching within the organization. So win-loss and game film, or whatever whatever analogy you want to use, they have this culture that's established where it's okay to break these things down, and it's good to spend some time understanding where the gaps are and where the opportunities are and how we can continue to get better individually and organizationally. And there's a culture of coaching up and coaching down, consistently. I think the more organizations have that kind of culture and established sort of mentality in place, similar to USC, it's like, we're going to do this every Monday. We're going to get together and we're going to break these things down. And that's how we get better as a team. Now when you're looking at a loss and you're analyzing that, it's okay if some of those things did fall on the sales experience, because, okay, well, what was it? How do we get better? How do we learn from that? Again, no different than the Kobe story or the USC story. How do we keep getting better? But you got to start with that foundational feeling of a safe environment for a seller to feel like it's okay to dissect these calls and get better.
So we had a question come in. It sounds important, but it sounds time consuming. Sounds difficult to get buyer feedback for every deal. Is it difficult to do that? Is it time consuming?
Yeah, great question. The fact is, it doesn't have to be, not if you have the right tools and the right services to help you. So if it's something you're committed to, if you're like, yeah, we want to have the Kobe mentality as a sales team and really go back and dissect what's gone well and poorly, we recognize that the buyers are the ones that hold these insights, and then we need to tap into those. So yeah, let's, as a sales organization, let's, as often as we can, get feedback directly from buyers to tell us why we win and lose. How do we do that? Well, there's tools that exist now. There's technology. There's platforms like Clozd that integrate directly with your CRM, whatever CRM you're using, and automate a process of outreach to buyers to invite them to participate and give feedback. You can have people internally on your teams, and there are a lot of teams now that want to support win-loss analysis. Your product marketing teams want to support this. Your sales enablement teams want to support it. Your sales ops teams want to support it. Even your product management teams want to support it, because all of these stakeholders need this data too. They can't do their jobs effectively without this data and feedback from the buyers. And so they're on standby wanting to support the sales organization in this type of initiative, and they can contribute budget and bandwidth to help carry this out. So it may be an internal party at your company, like a product marketing team or a sales enablement team that wants to carry out these interviews. Or you might say, hey, our best bet is to lean on a third party to help us, not only because the feedback will be superior, but because we don't have the bandwidth or capacity to do it ourselves. And that's where solutions like Clozd come in. Our services team can conduct the interviews for you. They're expert interviewers, and they can take on that load so that you as a sales leadership team just focus on consuming the feedback and hearing regularly the feedback and input from your buyers post-decision, so that you can turn your focus to what do we do next and how do we improve as a sales team.
That leads nicely into a question we got from Elaine Maurer. Elaine says, how do companies use this to improve their sales efforts? Andrew, how have you seen companies do win-loss analysis? What kind of lessons are companies learning?
Yeah, it's a great question. From a sales standpoint, I kind of bucket the feedback and insights you get into two actionable categories. One category is, what do you learn about how you're selling that you could improve as a sales team to win more? And then the other bucket is, what are we learning about what the rest of the organization needs to change and do to enable us to win more? And both of those are equally as actionable and as important. And buyers talk about both of them. So we hear a lot of themes, consistent themes, about what sales teams may be doing poorly that they can improve, and that companies like Janek can provide coaching and training to help improve. We hear things like the power of sales empathy and communication in driving deal outcomes. On wins, you hear consistent stories from companies that are good at this about how their sales team was so empathetic at listening and understanding the needs of the buyer, and then catering demos, catering the solution or the proposal to address those needs. And that's why they bought from that company. On the flip side, we hear a lot of stories about sales teams that lack that empathy, and they don't cater their approach, and they don't really listen to and understand the needs of the buyers. And if that's a theme that surfaces consistently, a sales leadership team needs to address that. Similarly, there's common themes about the level of influence or access to the decision maker during the sales process that the seller did or didn't have, the level of trust and professionalism that they established with the prospect, their knowledge and expertise about that domain and that product. Did the buyer feel like they were talking to an expert that could answer their difficult questions and be, in essence, a consultant to them instead of just trying to sell to them? And sometimes there's breakdowns in sales process and follow-up that need to be addressed by a company. So there's a lot that falls into bucket one that's immediately actionable for a sales team and a sales leadership team to say, hey, we're not going to lose because of these things anymore, and we're going to do what it takes and get the help that we need from a company like Janek to address these things and improve how we're selling. On the flip side, you got this other bucket of things like, oh, there's serious product gaps that need to be addressed. Oh, there's serious issues with our pricing model. And everybody's sick of hearing us as a sales team say it was pricing. But guess what? The buyers are telling us and validating that we do have an issue around pricing, and it's specifically around how it's packaged, or the level of transparency, or just the total cost of ownership relative to our competitors. And we need help from the rest of the organization to change these things. And now we have the data. It's not just us as a sales team coming and begging and saying, we think that these things need to be changed, because a lot of these teams, product teams, marketing teams, are kind of like, come on, like, you guys are just telling us it's price and product. So if you have, as a sales leadership team, the data to back these requests up and say, hey, product team, we really need to overhaul our user interface in our software product. It has to change. We're losing deals, and here is the data. That is what's going to drive that change across the organization and get the things moving that the sales team needs to be able to win more.
And great points. I love the way you bucketed those two things, Andrew. That makes a lot of sense to me as well. And I would add, a lot of the things that you mentioned are really great in reacting to some of the feedback that you're getting, which I think is clearly why we're talking about this today. But it also helps from a proactive standpoint. If you think about the marketing team and ways for them to define differentiators within an organization and be able to lead with some of those differentiators. How much more valuable of data can you get than what your customers and prospects are telling you why they are and why they're not working with you? You know, sometimes sellers lean into certain differentiators that have been defined by marketing, and maybe clients don't view them as that different, or maybe they're not really strong at differentiating those, you know, those differences, if you will. But if, you know, something like responsiveness or flexibility or, you know, eagerness to work on terms or whatever that might look like, that might be something that marketing may want to lead with as in an effort to make sure that you're further distinguishing yourself from competitors. So I completely agree. There's strong influence on the sales side, all the things that you mentioned, you know, building trust more effectively, increasing business acumen, you know, aligning solutions with needs in an effective way, you know, presenting persuasively. All those things are things we commonly see as well, and things we're always working with clients on to improve as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to build off that, Nick, we often get questions from our prospective customers about, is it important for us to solicit feedback for the wins?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it absolutely is for these same kinds of points. If you want to be proactive about how you differentiate and instilling in your sales team the capability to lean into those existing differentiators and win more because you're emphasizing them more effectively or you understand them better, like you've got to be getting the feedback on the wins, because that's your recipe for success. What is it that resonated with those customers that chose to move forward that you can then take and package up and enable your team with so that it's easier to win in the future? Oftentimes, the gold, the silver bullet to how to win more is buried in the win feedback more so than in the loss feedback.
Totally agree. Kobe talked about that also all the time. It's like, you're not just looking at the losses and be brave enough to look at those, but the wins tell a whole different story as well. What am I doing well? What do I keep doing better? You know, that you learn a lot from the wins as well. Couldn't agree more.
So we have another question. When you have these calls with the buyers to ask about win-loss, what was it that they did or didn't like? What are some of these common, like what are some commonalities you see in these sales-related decisions? What kind of things do you uncover, and do you help companies fix them?
Yeah, good question. So kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier, we see common themes and trends surface across a lot of our clients about sales empathy and communication, influence or access to decision maker, trust and professionalism, knowledge and expertise, process and follow-up. You know, not surprising things, all the things that if you've been in sales for a long time, you would expect to surface as key decision drivers that are sales related to how the sales process played out. And so those things do matter. And I think what surprises a lot of our clients actually when we start collecting this feedback on their behalf and delivering to them is just how often their top win and loss decision drivers are actually sales related. In fact, a lot of clients of ours come in thinking that the win-loss program is just going to surface those product gaps and other issues that need to be addressed. And they don't realize that actually in this day and age, when everybody says, Gartner always says, like, no one wants to work with a sales rep anymore, like everyone wants to just buy offline, do their research on their own. It's fascinating how in almost every single deal we analyze, the quality of the sales experience directly contributed to the win or the loss. And so sales performance is a critical factor in winning in this day and age, in this environment. And anyone who says otherwise just doesn't have access to this kind of data. And so it's vital that companies be paying close attention to how the sales performance is going. And I don't know how else you would get accurate, candid feedback, or in essence, a scorecard of how the sales team is doing without soliciting feedback from the prospects post-decision. But to the other part of your question, Sarah, do we fix these things for our clients? We don't. You know, we just view ourselves as a diagnostic tool and service to help them kind of uncover where the issues are. But we leave it up to our clients to go about finding ways or figuring out or leaning on consultants like Janek to say, hey, it looks like we're having consistent issues with empathy and communication, how that translates into the quality of the demo and the way we're presenting to our clients. We need help with that. Hey, Janek, can you guys help us? You know, we wouldn't do that, but obviously that's something that you guys would be great at.
Yeah, I think that's where we come in as an organization. And what we specialize in is to look at trends, look at data from companies like Clozd that specialize in that sort of win-loss analysis, and start to identify what those trends are and put the right measures in place to be able to close those gaps, whether that's training, coaching, talent management solutions. There's a variety of ways that you can go about that. But that's precisely what Janek does as an organization, is help close those gaps, create consistency in how sellers are approaching sales interactions, be more empathetic, ask the right questions, tailor the right solutions. The strong sort of value-based consultative selling skills that sellers need today to be effective.
So, Nick, going back to that game film analogy, great coaches need the analytics to lead effectively. How can reliable win-loss data empower sales leaders? And how can Janek support them in those endeavors?
Yeah, I think precisely what Andrew was just speaking to. When the win-loss analysis and those trends start to point out some of those opportunities from a development standpoint, I think that's exactly where Janek comes in. Also gaining some of that information, we've done that as well. But ultimately, once we have it, how do we close those gaps? And we are very prescriptive in our approach when we're partnering with clients to really understand where those gaps are, what competencies and skills need to be developed. And then we have a variety of training programs, delivery methods, and ways in which we can support an organization in closing those gaps and ultimately create institutional capabilities of high sales performance within those organizations. So we partner with clients to come up with what that approach might look like in a very practical way, a very tailored solution, and deliver training, coaching, and other solutions to drive better performance.
Fantastic. I have a couple of questions I would like to get to, if you guys are cool with that. One question we had, I guess, kind of a comment / question from Alante Basden. Excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your name. This is going to be for Andrew. What do you think about informing the prospect that this is part of our process, that we're going to be asking you for feedback along the way, and especially at the end? Would that be beneficial?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are some pros and cons to that strategy. One of the benefits is it's going to increase the likelihood that they take the exercise seriously and opt to participate when they do end up receiving the invitation post-decision. So they've been warmed up to it a little bit. They realize that it matters, probably, especially if part of your talk track is encouraging them, like, please, like, this feedback's important to us because of XYZ reasons. We take it seriously, so please participate. That's the pro. That's the benefit, is it will likely increase the number of prospects that end up opting in to participate in the feedback. The downside that you have to weigh is how much do you want the sales team to be involved as part of this process? Because it would likely be the seller that is giving this preface. And by having the seller give that preface, it kind of links the exercise with the seller and sometimes gives an impression to the buyer, like, yeah, this is like a feedback exercise. I can't be too critical of the seller. They're probably going to see this feedback potentially. It just kind of ties that together to where, it's still probably a third party or some neutral person from another part of the org that's doing the interview, but they still have in their mind, like, this is linked to the sales rep and the sales rep's aware of the exercise and was encouraged me to participate. So kind of like back in the day, you'd walk out of the Sprint or Verizon store and the rep that was working with you is like, please give me a 10 because like my comp's based on it. So when you get the survey, take it and give a 10, so it's a little bit like that. So you have to weigh those two, because if you're having low participation rates, you might just say, hey, it's worth it. Like, let's have the sales reps give a little nudge and preface to get people to participate. But that's as far as we would take it. Some companies go even further and have the sales rep like do the outreach and inviting and say, hey, when are you available? Would you participate? Because they're like, hey, the sales rep's already got a relationship. They're more likely to respond to the sales rep. It feels more personal. That we feel like takes it too far to where that link between the exercise and the rep is just too tight now. Like you don't want to bias the way that they participate in the feedback. So
I think that also addresses a question from Brian Fletcher, who asked, is it helpful to have a third party? Like, is that more impactful to have a third party do it, or is this something that you could or should do entirely in-house?
Yeah, it's a great question. The proof is in the pudding for companies that have tried having a third party do this for them, in that they actually see the difference in the nature of the feedback. Companies that have tried doing it in-house before, that then start to outsource, routinely tell us like the nature of feedback is so much more robust. They're being so much more candid with you and the closed interviewers than they were historically with us when it was an internal person doing the interview. So, and that kind of brings up an offer that we have for those that tuned into the webinar to, as a token of appreciation, if you will, Sarah. I think maybe you have a slide about it, just that we have a win-loss toolkit that we offer. And I bring that up now because as part of that toolkit, we offer to conduct a free win-loss interview for your company. So of a recent win or a loss, we'll go out and do one of these, and you'll be able to see, what the quality of the feedback looks like and the nature of feedback that a prospect gives when they're talking with a neutral third party and through an expert interviewer. So that's something that for those that are on the call, they're like, hey, I kind of want to test this out and see, like, really, how helpful would it be to have a third party do these interviews for us? Check out, use that QR code, access that toolkit, and then you can go through the process of getting a free third party win-loss interview from Clozd.
That's awesome. And I'll share that slide again toward the end for those of you who missed it. And also in your follow-up emails, we'll share links to the free tools from an evaluation from Clozd and Janek both. So this is a question. I'm going to kind of consolidate several questions we got both in registration and during this event. That a question for both of you. So one, how do you not get lost in the data? How do you know, like, what data is important, what data is impactful? How do you dial in on what's the most impactful data? And then Nick, on your end, as you're consulting with clients, how do you not get lost in the improvement, in the application, in the use of that data to change and inform sales processes and coaching?
Yeah, so I can take the first part of that. At Clozd, we have a very tailored, deliberate methodology by which we surface what we refer to as decision drivers. So you don't want to overreact to a single anecdote. Doing one win-loss interview of one key deal that you cherry picked, that's the one big deal that you lost, and then assuming that that's representative of why you're winning and losing all your other deals is not what you want to go do. You want to have a disciplined process of analyzing lots of your deals, as many as possible that are representative of your full pipeline. And then a methodology like what Clozd offers of across these interviews, deal by deal, tagging the key decision drivers that influenced each deal, and then aggregating those over time and weighing things like how often are these coming up and how strong is this positive or negative sentiment in influencing these deal outcomes, and aggregating those to see emerging trends and themes like, oh, the top reasons we lose are X, Y, and Z. The top reasons we win are A, B, C. And so it's very important that you step back and you look at the big picture, back to the coach analogy. Like, the coach is trying to look at not just one individual's performance, but trying to step back and look at the team as a whole. And what can the team change and do? What can the team change strategically about their approach to the game to improve their likelihood of winning? As a sales leader, you want to do the same thing. You want to look at the big picture. Don't get hung up on one single anecdote, but instead look at the bigger picture. And so that's a big part of the Clozd value proposition. Is it can be hard to get lost in the details if you're just relying on yourself to review one by one feedback that's getting published from these buyers. Instead, you want a platform or an approach or a strategy to paint the big picture. And that's what Clozd offers, is a platform that has the visualizations and the breakdowns and the ability to drill into each individual issue, but zoom out and see the big picture, look at it by time period, et cetera, see how it's trending and changing over time. You hire Janek to say, hey, help us improve our empathy in the sales process. And 6 months later, you look at the data and all of a sudden you see, hey, what used to be a weakness is now spiking as a strength. It's a key reason why we're winning business. And now we can attribute that to Janek and the work that we've done over the last 6 months to elevate our sales execution.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it starts with the way the data is collected. I think Andrew spoke to those, but I think there's a quantity and a quality of data element to it first. If you don't have enough deals and you don't have enough analysis and you're making decisions off a few losses or a few wins, if you will, you might be at risk, right, of reacting to things, overreacting to things without a broader set of data. I think a common misconception around win-loss analysis is you only have to do it on the big deals. And that's really not the case. I mean, I think every deal matters, right, ultimately, and every deal has similar feedback or has the ability to provide feedback that can inform the sales organization and the broader company around some of these things that we're discussing. So I think there's a quantity element, and I think the quality of the data is, and what I mean by quality is, I think there needs to be a regimented process on the way questions are asked in the interviews, on the technology that's being leveraged, so you can start to see trends more broadly. I completely agree with Andrew. If you're looking at every deal one by one and trying to dissect what happened, and you're going to get lost in that data, you're going to have a really hard time deciphering where the gaps truly are. It needs to be more systematic, and you need to look at it at a bit higher of a level. I think once you see those trends, right, and you start to identify, is it a product issue, if you will, pricing, product positioning, product gap, or if it's a capability issue on the sales side, then I think you really need to zero in on, okay, what skills and competencies need to be developed. And I think that plan for closing those gaps needs to be very regimented and calculated. You know, you might come out of that analysis and realize empathy is a challenge, the way we discover needs, presentation skills, negotiations, whatever, it could be a variety of topics. You have to think about how you approach that from a training and development perspective. And you can't train everything at once. You know, like, you have to be calculated in what is most important, what's going to drive results earlier, and then what is the right way to implement that training in a practical way, considering coaching and sustainment and internal resources within the organization to make sure those skills stick and become permanent behaviors 6 months later, 9 months later, whatever that time is needed to do that. So I think it's just the right data, the right level of data, the amount of data, but then also the right training and development plan to close those gaps.
Nick, one of the things we talk about at Janek a lot is kind of insightful question, asking the right questions and empathetic listening, active listening. One of the questions we got from Nora here is, what are some of the tactics, kind of the implementation side, what are some of the tactics we can use from our diagnostic win-loss analysis to craft more insightful questions during the actual proposal process? Like, rubber meets the road.
Yeah, we have a very specific questioning strategy that we focus on at Janek. We call it the critical areas of focus, but we've essentially identified what are the areas that top performing salespeople will explore within the sales process to make sure that they clearly and deeply understand an organization's needs and the individual's needs that you're interacting with. And it's a variety of topics that fall into the critical areas of focus. It's things like needs and challenges, the people and relationships within the organization, their buying process, options and alternatives, impact to decisions and consequences. So there's a variety of things. You can certainly learn more about it at janek.com and look at our critical selling methodology. That goes deep into the questioning process and how you can get to know your customers better and make sure that you are offering tailored solutions to clients. But yeah, we have a very specific strategy for how you discover needs.
Mm-hmm.
So in our last few minutes here, I'd like to go back to the offer you mentioned earlier, Andrew, starting with you. So if someone wants to get the level of their win-loss analysis, what does Clozd offer them? How can they get started? How can they get a sample of the work that you do?
Yeah, so the toolkit that we provide here that you guys can download has a bunch of resources in it, including that offer for a free win-loss interview. It also has an asset in there called the Definitive Guide to Win-Loss Analysis that provides like a really detailed step-by-step guide to implementing a win-loss analysis program, covering everything from how do you set up the data collection, what are the right questions to be considering asking in your interviews, what role can other data collection mechanisms like surveys play in augmenting your interview strategy for companies that have large pipeline sizes. And then all the way through, what do you do with the data? How do you aggregate it? How do you share it? What are mechanisms or processes you can put in place at your company to make sure you get the most value out of the insights? So what are some tactics about sharing the insights and driving dialogue and action as a company from those insights that you're collecting? So that is one resource I'd really point people towards if you feel like you're early in your journey with win-loss analysis and are looking for help getting started. And then, of course, you can always get in touch. You can always reach out to me, Andrew@clozd.com, or contact our team to talk with one of our win-loss experts.
I'll say, Andrew, your explanation answered about 6 questions that I have still hanging out here about that I think will be pretty clearly answered, or at least give them some direction through this tool. So good job. Good job.
Awesome.
Reading people's minds in advance. Nick, let's talk about Janek, where people can start. What kind of tool do you want to offer today for people who are interested in learning more about their kind of sales organization more broadly?
Yeah. So yeah, we developed a tool for leaders and sales leaders to better understand how their organization performs against high-performing world-class sales organizations. To go in and do an in-depth assessment, obviously, can be time-consuming and require a lot of resources. So we developed a tool that is self-paced, self-assessed, that a sales leader can go on and again assess how their organization performs within what we term the sales performance blueprint. So we've identified 6 pillars and 18 different competencies that are in line with top performing sales organizations, with a 5-scale maturity model, where you can clearly see how your organization is performing in each of those categories. So again, self-paced, you can use this QR code to go online, take the assessment, and we'll actually provide immediately a report to you that will show you how your organization is performing against high performing organizations. And it'll actually give you actionable recommendations on how you can improve on different levels of that maturity model as well. So it is a great tool if you want to learn more about your organization and how you compare against high-performing organizations.
Fantastic. We're coming right up against time here. Any closing thoughts?
I would just say there's a power in the combination of Clozd and Janek. So if anybody's using Janek and considering Clozd, or using Clozd and considering Janek, there's power in the way we can customize the approach to the win-loss interviewing to incorporate aspects of the Janek methodology to kind of confirm and help track some of these elements of the Janek framework and methodology. So that's something that for those of you that might be mutual customers of Clozd and Janek, you could get in touch with us about, and we could explore with you.
Yeah, I would add to that. Excited for the opportunity to do this with you today, Andrew. And yeah, if the organization is struggling at all with how they can improve sales, overall performance, I think we've provided some great food for thought today. But certainly, if there's any need for win-loss or just further development within the organization, we're both here as a great resource.
Fantastic. As I mentioned to the participants here and to anybody who registered, you'll get a copy of this video sent to you via email, as well as links to these free tools, especially if you're watching on your mobile and you're trying to figure out how to scan a QR code. We'll make it easy for you. Nick, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to the team at Clozd for being with us today. I think this has been a great discussion, and we look forward to working with you more in the future. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks,
Sarah.
Thanks,
Thanks, Nick.
You as well. Thanks.